Don't scroll. Not because this is a warning, not because this is a prophecy, and not because you owe this video your attention. Stop because something already shifted the moment you read the title. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't hype. It was that quieter thing, an almost neutral clarity, like a lens snapping into focus. And if you're honest, you can feel it right now as a small reduction in internal noise. Give me 10 seconds. Keep your eyes on the screen, but move your attention inward. Notice your breath without changing it. Notice your jaw, your shoulders, the muscles around your eyes. Are you tight? Are you scattered? Or is there a slight steadiness appearing, a calm that doesn't feel emotional but structural? Don't chase a sensation. Just observe what's already there. That observation is the point. Most people live inside automatic motion. They scroll because the mind wants stimulation, because boredom feels dangerous, because stillness exposes the noise underneath. But if you can watch the pull instead of being pulled, you've already entered the threshold. And that's what this video is about. Not a mystical secret, not a trend, not a motivational speech. A cognitive shift that very few people stabilize because it requires something rare, sustained attention without drama. The title says, only 1% of people can activate this quantum frequency, and your mind will want to argue with it. Good, let it argue. Skepticism is not the enemy, automaticity is. What most people miss is that frequency is not always a metaphor. In biology, in neuroscience, in physics, everything that coordinates oscillates. Your heart has rhythm. Your brain has rhythms. Your attention has rhythms. Your emotions have rhythms. Your behavior has rhythms. The question is whether those rhythms are fragmented or coherent. So here's the first open loop. What if the quantum frequency isn't a sound, a vibration, or a supernatural signal, but a state of coherence where your system stops fighting itself? What if activating it means aligning attention, physiology, and meaning-making into one stable frame? And what if the reason only a small percentage can do it isn't because they're chosen, but because most people can't tolerate the conditions required to stabilize it? Because this is the uncomfortable truth. The mind prefers intensity over clarity. It prefers stimulation over stillness. It prefers being right over being aware. That preference keeps you trapped in a loop where you consume ideas the way you consume entertainment, and you mistake emotional spikes for transformation. If you're here for fireworks, you'll miss it. If you're here for structure, you'll recognize it. Now listen carefully. Quantum gets abused online, but there's one thing the word can remind you of that is actually useful. At the smallest scales, systems behave differently when they are observed. Not because your mind is magical, but because measurement changes what can be seen. In your own life, attention is measurement. What you consistently observe becomes clearer. What you never observe runs your behavior in the dark. The frequency is what happens when observation becomes stable enough to reorganize the system. So let's define it in grounded terms. The quantum frequency I'm pointing to is a coherence instruction. It's the state where the noise between your thought, your emotion, and your body reduces, where you stop oscillating between contradictory identities, where you can feel a trigger arise and still choose your response, where you can think without being consumed by thinking, where your nervous system is regulated enough that perception becomes accurate. Most people never activate that because they outsource regulation. They use scrolling, sugar, arguments, fantasies, and constant novelty to manage discomfort. Those tools work short-term, but they fragment attention. Fragmented attention creates fragmented identity. Fragmented identity creates a constant need for external confirmation, and that cycle keeps your system in a low-grade survival mode, even if your life looks fine on the outside. The 1% are not special because they're smarter. They're rare because they do something most people refuse to do. They stay present in the gap between stimulus and response. They practice coherence until it becomes baseline. They learn how to observe their own meaning-making instead of being dragged by it. They stop treating awareness as a mood and start treating it as an operating system. Here's the second open loop. If coherence is the frequency, then the activation isn't a ritual, it's a reorientation. And once you reorient, you don't go back to unconscious outsourcing in the same way again. Your brain is a predictive machine. It doesn't wait for reality and then react. It predicts constantly. It builds a model of what's happening from memory, pattern recognition, and expectation, and then it serves you that model as if it were reality itself. Most of the time, you mistake the model for the world. You defend it. You identify with it. You suffer inside it. You call that suffering life, when it's often just a rigid prediction loop. This is why two people can live the same day and experience completely different realities. One has a model that scans for threat, so everything feels hostile. Another has a model that scans for meaning, so everything feels instructive. The environment is similar, the architecture is different, and the architecture is what changes when you activate coherence. In cognitive science, the default mode network is heavily involved in self-referential narrative. The story of me, my past, my future, what they think, what I need to prove. That story is efficient, but it's also loud. When the system is stressed, the story tightens, it becomes compulsive, it becomes identity, and you become trapped in a loop where you can't stop thinking about yourself, yet you can't actually see yourself clearly. Coherence changes your relationship to that narrative. The story doesn't vanish, it loses authority. You start witnessing the story being constructed. You notice thoughts arriving as events rather than commands. You feel emotions as signals rather than verdicts. You see the mind reaching for interpretation, and you can pause before you attach it. That pause is the doorway. That pause is the frequency. Now, why call it quantum at all? Because the shift is not incremental. It's not a little better mood. It's a phase change. It's the moment the system recognizes the system. Before that, you are inside the model. After that, you are aware of the model. You can still use it, but you're no longer confined by it. That is a one-way door. And this is where the only 1% claim becomes psychologically precise. Most people have moments of clarity. They meditate for a week, they read a book, they feel inspired, they have a calm afternoon, but they don't stabilize it. The system falls back into old grooves because the grooves are familiar and because chaos, strangely, can feel like home. The nervous system prefers the known, even if the known is painful. The 1% are the ones who understand that the early stage is fragile. When you first glimpse coherence, it can either install as baseline or get overwritten by noise. Your brain is not sentimental. It prunes what you don't reinforce. If you treat this as content, it becomes content. If you treat this as practice, it becomes structure. So here's a simple test. Think of the last time you felt triggered. Maybe it was a message, a comment, a memory. Notice how fast your mind wrote a story about it. Notice how fast your body tightened. Notice how fast your identity took the steering wheel. That speed is not you being bad. That speed is predictive processing doing its job. The question is whether you can slow it down enough to see it. Activation is not about being calm all the time. It's about becoming aware fast enough that you have choice, and choice is the true power people mistake for high frequency. Let me make this concrete, because the mind loves to turn coherence into a pretty word and then forget it the moment a notification appears. Think of the last time you woke up and reached for your phone before your feet touched the floor. That one motion seems harmless, but it teaches your nervous system a rule. The outside world gets the first claim on your attention. Over months, that rule becomes a posture. Your brain learns that silence is a gap to be filled, not a space to inhabit. That posture is the opposite of activation. It keeps your system scattered, and scattered systems cannot hold a stable frequency. Coherence is what happens when you reverse that rule. Not by forcing yourself to be calm, but by noticing the construction process early enough to interrupt it. You catch the moment your mind begins to narrate, the moment it begins to predict danger, the moment it begins to attach identity to sensation. You don't suppress the narrative, you see it, and seeing it changes your relationship to it. This is why quantum language attracts people here. At the edge of the known, certainty fails. The mind wants to believe there's a hidden layer where reality responds directly to thought. I'm not asking you to believe that. I'm pointing to something subtler and more useful. Your life responds to what your attention reinforces. That is not mysticism, that is learning. That is conditioning, that is neuroplasticity. You become what you repeatedly attend to, because attention is the brain's way of saying, this matters. So ask yourself, what have you been reinforcing? If your attention has been trained on outrage, you will perceive outrage everywhere. If it has been trained on comparison, you will feel behind even when you're progressing. If it has been trained on novelty, you will struggle to stay with anything long enough to deepen. And if it has been trained on fear disguised as being realistic, you will call your anxiety wisdom. Activation is not escaping these patterns. Activation is seeing them as patterns in the first place. There's another piece people overlook. The body is not separate from meaning. When your physiology is dysregulated, your interpretations skew. A tight chest becomes something is wrong. A racing heart becomes I'm unsafe. A clenched jaw becomes I need to win. The mind then builds a story to justify what the body is already signaling. This is why you can't talk your way into coherence while living in constant tension. Regulation is not self-care aesthetics, it is perceptual accuracy. And accuracy changes everything. When your nervous system is calm enough, you can feel a thought arise without obeying it. You can feel a fear without turning it into identity. You can feel uncertainty without reaching for a quick belief to cover it. That capacity is what most people call high frequency, not because it's glamorous, but because it's rare. If you want a real marker, it's this. You start noticing the moment you want to be compelled, the moment you want to click the next thing, the moment you want to prove yourself in an argument, the moment you want to escape a feeling by drowning it in content. That noticing is the activation beginning. It's the system detecting the hook before the hook sets. This is also why the frequency can feel like it fades. When you first taste coherence, it's new, so it feels vivid. Then life pulls you back. Responsibilities, stress, noise, social pressure. The mind says, see, it was just a mood. But it wasn't a mood. It was a reference point. And the purpose of a reference point is not to impress you, it's to calibrate you. Calibration means you can return, over and over. Each return strengthens the pathway. Each return makes the activation less dramatic and more normal. That's when it becomes powerful. When it stops being an experience you chase and becomes the place you operate from. So consider the real promise behind the title. It's not that 99% are locked out by fate. It's that 99% will keep living in reactive loops because they confuse speed with strength. They confuse certainty with wisdom. They confuse emotional intensity with truth. Coherence asks for none of that. It asks for a clean, steady attention that can hold complexity without collapsing into a story. And that's the part people avoid, because complexity without story feels like emptiness at first. When you stop narrating, there's a gap. In that gap, you might feel grief you've been outrunning. You might feel fear you've been masking with productivity. You might feel the weight of choices you've been postponing. The mind will call that gap low vibration and run back to the feed. But that gap is where integration begins. It's where your system stops performing and starts reorganizing. If you can stay with that gap, even briefly, you begin to notice something else. The world doesn't need to change for you to be steady. Your relationships can still be messy. Your work can still be uncertain. Your plans can still be unfinished. and yet your internal posture can be coherent. That's not escapism, that's resilience, that's the frequency. Because you're human, you'll want to see it in real life. It looks like taking criticism, feeling the sting, and staying present. It looks like noticing anxiety and breathing before you name it a disaster. It looks like speaking truth without performing for approval. It looks like choosing deliberate action over compulsive ones. These are not small things. These are the levers that change your future. And the reason only a small percentage consistently live this way is not because they have secret knowledge. It's because they have trained attention the way athletes train muscle. They have built a relationship with their own mind that isn't based on fear, entertainment, or avoidance. So keep the question alive as we move into the stabilization phase. What are you reinforcing today? Not what do you believe, not what do you want, but what are you rehearsing with your attention, your breath, your reactions, your choices? That answer tells you exactly what frequency you're activating. Now we talk about the protocol, because if you want this to be real, it has to survive your normal life, not your best day, your normal day. The next 48 hours matter because the brain encodes what is repeated during a window of salience. Right now, if you're listening with that clean attention, the window is open. Your job is to reinforce coherence until it becomes functional. Start with the smallest move, the pause, a half-second gap before you react, before you reply, before you open the next app, before you speak when you feel the urge to defend yourself. That gap strengthens prefrontal regulation over limbic reflex. In human terms, it gives you sovereignty. The old system is immediate. Stimulus becomes reaction. Reaction becomes identity. The new system inserts observation first. You will feel resistance. It will feel like boredom, restlessness, impatience. That's not failure. That's withdrawal from stimulation. Your mind has been trained to equate constant input with safety. Stillness exposes the raw engine of seeking. So you don't fight the restlessness, you observe it. That observation is already coherence. Then train the simplest form of metacognition. Watch a thought appear and label it as an event, thinking. Not because labeling is magical, but because it interrupts fusion. It reminds your system that a thought is something happening, not something you are. When you can do that, even briefly, mental noise decreases. And when noise decreases, clarity becomes self-evident. Regulate your breath without making it into a performance. Slightly longer exhales, a steady rhythm for 60 seconds when you notice tension. This is not spirituality, it's physiology. A regulated body makes accurate perception possible. An unregulated body turns neutral events into threats. Most people try to think their way into coherence. It doesn't work. Coherence is embodied first. Now protect your attention. If you keep feeding your system fragmented novelty while you're trying to stabilize, you will train fragmentation. Choose micro-boundaries. 1 hour without switching apps. A meal without a screen. A walk without headphones. A morning without immediately consuming other people's thoughts. Not as discipline, as installation protection. You wouldn't update an operating system while opening 100 programs. Your mind is the same. And add deliberate silence. 3 minutes. No music, no podcast, no background noise. Just sitting and noticing the impulse to fill the space. That impulse is the seeking mechanism. It has driven you for years. When you see it directly, it weakens, not by force, by visibility. Here's what will happen next. You'll fluctuate. You'll have a moment of clean observation and then find yourself back in an old loop, scrolling, reacting, overthinking, almost like waking up midway through it. That is recalibration. Each time you catch it and return without self-attack, you strengthen the new pathway. Self-attack reinforces identity defense. Calm correction reinforces coherence. Now, the most important part of the protocol is this. Apply it in one real moment today, not in theory. In a situation that would usually trigger you. The next time your body tightens, pause. Exhale, Observe the thought. Notice the story forming, then choose the response you respect. That single choice is how the frequency becomes yours, not as an idea you liked, but as a structure you live. And you'll notice something strange as you do this. Seeking decreases. Not curiosity, seeking. The desperate reaching for external confirmation begins to dissolve. You stop hunting for signs. You stop needing other people to validate your reality. You start observing how meaning is constructed in real time. That is what wisdom looks like when it becomes structural. This is why only a small percentage activate it, because activating it means giving up a familiar addiction. The addiction to being compelled, the addiction to reacting, the addiction to the feed. Most people don't want freedom. If freedom requires responsibility for attention, they want a new belief, a new label, a new tribe. Coherence offers none of that. It offers quiet. Now let's close the loop. If you've been listening, you may feel calmer than when you started. Not euphoric, not hyped. Clean. That's the marker. That's your system aligning. The message is simple. Meaning isn't found. Meaning is constructed, and now you can see the construction. Once you see it, you don't scroll the same way again. The feed becomes a choice, not a force. So do something small to signal reinforcement. If this helped, hit like, not as a ritual, as a marker to yourself that grounded awareness matters more than noise. Subscribe if you want more mechanism and less mythology, and leave a comment with 2 things. First, did you feel calmer or clearer at any point while listening? Even 1 word is enough. Second, where are you watching from? What city, what country, what corner of the world is receiving this right now? Read a few comments after you post yours, not to compare, but to recognize the pattern. Different lives, same threshold. And then close the app for a minute. 1 slow exhale. 1 deliberate pause before the next action. Let coherence be your baseline. Quietly, steadily, and permanently.